Yes, we are. We'll keep an eye out for Carmen.
1 minute, 6:29.
The mayor is nothing if not timely.
Don't want to get in trouble for starting early though, Mayor. Okay, 6:30.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for joining me to discuss homelessness in Wheat Ridge. I convene this meeting because homelessness is a complicated issue that impacts us all. Addressing homelessness is of primary importance to me, City Council and staff, and is one of Council's strategic priorities. I want to be clear that as a city government, we are clearly focused on this issue. Before we begin, let me share my plan for the meeting so you'll know what to expect. First, you will notice that this meeting is being interpreted in American Sign Language. Thank you to our interpreters, Julia and Megan, for joining us this evening. Next, please note that this meeting is being recorded. We will post the recording on the city's YouTube channel later this week, which you can find on our website. Tonight, you will hear from a number of individuals about the regional and local work that is underway to combat homelessness in Wheat Ridge and Jefferson County. First, you will hear from Kelli Barker, the Regional Homeless Coordinator for Jefferson County. Kelli will talk about homelessness in Jeffco, what it looks like, what's hidden beneath the surface, and the regional picture. Next, you will hear from Carmen Beery from the City Attorney's Office about our constitutional issues related to homelessness. You will then hear from Kelli Barker again about the specifics of the regional approach to end homelessness. Then we will hear from Rebekah, Raudabaugh, the city's homeless navigator. Rebekah will talk about her experience so far in working with members of the homeless population, and she'll describe ways you can help. Next, you'll hear from Randle Loeb. Randle has experienced homelessness and will share his experiences and perspectives on serving the homeless population. Finally, you'll hear from Wheat Ridge Mayor Patrick Goff about the city's programs, plans, and resources addressing homelessness. I expect this first session of our meeting will last about an hour. Following this, I will facilitate a question and answer discussion. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your question. We'll review those and then address the question to the person best to answer it on the panel. If you would like to speak during the question and answer period, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature. We will bring you onto the screen or unmute you on the phone to ask your question. Please keep your questions and your remarks brief, no more than 2 minutes. Please do not raise your hand during the presentations. We will take all questions at the end of all questions during the question and answer period. We have created a special page on What's Up Wheat Ridge, our online community engagement website with lots of information about homelessness. The page contains answers to frequently asked questions and information about housing, the Homeless Navigator program, and ways you can get involved. I'll mention this at the end of our meeting again, but there's also a survey for you to take and a space for you to ask questions of city staff. Without further ado, let's get started. Again, I'll say that homelessness is a complicated and complex issue. In fact, it's a wicked problem, one without a clear solution. Residents have noticed the increase in people experiencing homelessness in the I-70 and Kipling corridor and along the Clear Creek Greenbelt. These visible impacts include illegal camping, trash, and panhandling. Some residents are calling on me to clean it up. Others are calling on me to provide help and resources for these members of our society. Many people believe that police should bear the primary responsibility of responding to these issues. Others don't think the police should be involved at all. The truth is that homelessness is a shared community responsibility and cannot be addressed with just one approach. People experiencing homelessness include moms and dads, children, veterans, and people who have experienced unimaginable trauma in their lives. All of this complicates this issue, a very difficult issue. I know there's a great deal of frustration, fear, anger, and empathy among Wheat Ridge residents about this topic. I reiterate that the city is dedicating a wide range of resources to address the public safety and sanitation impacts, as well as the humanitarian support to members of our homeless population. I hope you'll find this evening informative. And now I'll turn over to Kelli Barker. Kelli is the regional homeless coordinator working for Jefferson County. She coordinates the countywide response to homelessness, serves as the chair as the Heading Home Committee, and supports the Homeless Navigation Collaborative. She has worked in the field of homelessness for over 20 years in various capacities in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors. Kelli, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Just going to share my screen. I just have a few slides this evening, and before I do that, I just want to thank the city and Mayor for just hosting this really important conversation on this really important and relevant topic. So I'm just going to provide a few minutes, about 10 minutes of just context on the issue of homelessness in general, both local and then kind of zoom out a little bit for broader context. What are some of the causes, the myths, the truths, et cetera. And we have a little bit of data for Wheat Ridge and Jeffco specifically, but I won't smother you in data, but I just have a few, I think, pretty relevant slides that I want to show. So this is what homelessness looks like across the Jeffco municipalities. This data is taken from a comprehensive summer homeless count Jefferson County conducted in conjunction with all of the municipalities in August of 2019. So the data is quickly becoming a little outdated, but this is really the most comprehensive data set we have in Jefferson County and really told us a lot. So you can see here just kind of the spread of where most of individuals who experience homelessness live throughout Jefferson County. Of course, Lakewood holds the predominant majority of individuals, and Wheat Ridge comes in at third here with about 93 individuals experiencing homelessness. And I should note that this count counted not only people that are literally homeless on the street and in shelters, but also people that are living doubled up and couch surfing and those sorts of just precariously housed on the brink of homelessness. So that's what you're seeing here. The dark blue is unsheltered, so people that are living outside or in a car, and then the light blue is in sheltered facilities or either emergency shelters or again in couch surfing in folks' homes.
Kelli, may I interrupt for a second? This is Allie. I'm wondering if we could just stop sharing screen for a second while we figure out how to make sure that the ASL interpreters can be seen on the screen.
Okay,
I am
sure.
so sorry. It's something we considered when we talked about sharing slides. I'm really sorry.
Sure, no problem. I can just read off the slides. Hold on.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Pause, share. Stop share. Okay, there we go. Is that better? Okay, great. So you did see, I mean, there's a few graphs in here. I'll just describe kind of a little bit more of the data. So homelessness and Wheat Ridge specific, the next slide kind of have, and I'll send this out so folks can have this on a later time, but kind of the spread among at-risk population, literal homeless population, and chronically homeless population. So that chronically homeless population are folks that have long histories of homelessness, have some significant health issues often, and have a disability. So that came in about 20% of the homeless population in Wheat Ridge, which is pretty typical percentage across the country. About 19 of those 93 individuals were indicated they were chronically homeless. And then of those, the total 93, 39 were just literally homeless and not chronically homeless. So total of around 60 that were literally homeless out of the 93. I have another chart that shows kind of where people slept at night, where they reported sleeping at night. And it just really shows that the predominant number of individuals were unsheltered. So we have 28 unsheltered individuals living outside. and then 29 that were reporting sleeping in their vehicle, and the rest were with friends and families, hotels, motels, self-pay. Those were much significantly less. So the vast majority were living unsheltered in Wheat Ridge during that count. So the last I just wanted to point out, there's a bar graph that shows, really illustrates very clearly just the disproportionality of homelessness in communities of color and persons of color. This is a data point that bears out nationally, statewide, metro-wide, and all the way down to Wheat Ridge. We can see this data that people of color are disproportionately affected by homelessness. So that's, I think of homelessness very much as a downstream issue. It's really the result of multiple system failures over long decades. And so many of these systems have systemic racism and whatnot included in them, and were designed that way. And so it's not a huge surprise that this downstream effect, you can see this disproportionate effect in persons of color, but it's still something that we can, in terms of our interventions, we can be really mindful about making sure that we can reverse that to the extent that's possible in our solutions. But we also need upstream remediation for these issues as well. So homelessness, just some myths and truths. I was asked to speak just kind of what we hear about what's typically out there, myths around homelessness, and what's true and what's not. So throughout my experience of homelessness, and I'm excited that Randle is on today to speak more to his experience as well. But homelessness it's solvable. And I know a lot of people kind of laugh when you say that, but truly homelessness, the word indicates that if you provide people with homes, they're no longer homeless. So it is solvable. It's not always been at the level we've had it, and we know that it didn't used to be this way. So therefore, something happened that made it get to this extent that it is today. So with that same political will that created that kind of issue and policies that created some of these system failures, we know if we reverse it, we can, it is a solvable problem. And we've seen big strides in some communities to that end that have made dramatic reductions. We know that it's a result from poverty and unaffordable housing as the common thread throughout all of homelessness. And that gap between, it's really an economic issue at many levels, that gap between wages and housing affordability is just getting wider and wider, and that's pushing more and more people into homelessness. And then, multiple system failures, which I mentioned earlier, from family systems to foster care systems to criminal justice through education, on and on, all of our society systems and housing systems in general, that systematically kind of things such as redlining and housing covenants, all of these things were systems that really created this kind of recipe that's created this crisis of homelessness that we see today. And then it's traumatic, as Mayor mentioned at the beginning. It's important not to forget the trauma that precedes homelessness. It often leads to homelessness, and the trauma that occurs after you become homeless, and just the effect that has on someone's brain and body and behavior, and all of those things. That's kind of an invisible thread of homelessness that we don't often see and give enough credit to, but it's really significant and impactful in someone's lives. And until they really get housing and stability and connection with community and whatnot, and health, that it's really hard to heal from that trauma and truly recover. So what it's not a homogenous experience or one type of person. It's kind of why you hear a lot persons experiencing homelessness to try and individualize it. When you say homeless people, it's like, it's not one type of people. People that are living through homelessness are as diverse as housed individuals. So it's really hard to talk about the problem homogenously like that. It's also not caused by one thing. It's often, when you talk to folks in experiencing housing crisis or experiencing homelessness, the path into that loss of housing was not often one thing. It was multiple things. It was set upon a foundation of extreme poverty and really teetering on the edge of homelessness for a long time. And maybe they created, there was a health crisis in the family, or family crisis or domestic violence where the family broke up. And then, maybe someone was traumatized, maybe someone started to use and became addicted, lost their job. There's these cascade of events that it's really important to remember. So it just, as Mayor mentioned earlier, it's very complex, and the paths into homelessness are as complex and varied as the paths out of it. And then lastly, a choice. You hear often, this is probably the most common myth, is homelessness is a choice. And, I think the choices vary. The choices, sometimes you hear people will say that it's a choice. I think it's important to remember that sleeping outside is never their best option. It doesn't mean that someone's choosing to be homeless, but really that they lack a lot of other choices. And so, often the only other choice is an overcrowded shelter where they often can't bring a significant other or their pets or whatever their lifeline or support system is, or feel like they'd be further traumatized in those settings. So yes, in relation to that choice, they'll choose to be outside or whatnot, but it's not a lot of choices is really the thing to remember. And lastly, just I have a little table in there, a little chart that just shows kind of the tip of the iceberg and just the invisibility of homelessness, the population I mentioned earlier of more chronic homeless individuals, that only makes up about 20% of the homeless population. So those are really the most visibly homeless individuals that you see. But again, it's the minority. The majority of people that experience homelessness are transitionally homeless, maybe one time, have been teetering on the brink and maybe lost their job and need some one-time assistance and can get out and will never fall into homelessness again. And those are a lot of the families and things that Mayor mentioned earlier. And then there are many people who are kind of episodically homeless, maybe can hold a job or hold housing together for 9-10 months and then fall in again for a few months and kind of in and out. But you see that top percentage, a lot on the streets, and many people think that's the entirety of the homelessness problem, and it's really just the tip of the iceberg. So I'll stop there and pass it to Carmen.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. We'll turn it over to Carmen Beery now to discuss the constitutional issues related to homelessness. Carmen is a partner with the law firm of Murray, Dahl, Beery, and Renaud, and is one of the city's attorneys. Ms. Beery regularly works with the Wheat Ridge Police Department on a variety of issues, including those involving law enforcement and constitutional protections. Carmen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for kicking us off, Kelly. That was good information. I have been tasked this evening with providing a little thumbnail sketch of some of the constitutional issues that touch upon homelessness, and I'll do my best to do that in not too dry of a law school lecture kind of a way here in the next 10 minutes or so. I wanted to focus mainly on the two particular areas of law previously mentioned by both Mayor Starker and Kelly as the issues that we see legally implicated at the local level by issues of homelessness. And those are issues of speech, of solicitation, of asking for things that we often see in relation to homeless individuals, often around our highway interchanges here at Wheat Ridge, our I-70 interchanges. And then also freedom of movement issues, the right to travel, and more specifically camping, and laws that touch upon anti-camping ordinances and challenges to those sorts of local ordinances that we have seen increasingly, both here in Colorado and the national level. Those profoundly affect, and a lot of challenges have been brought on behalf of folks experiencing homelessness and how anti-camping ordinances affect them. What I think you will see, and what I'll touch upon here in the next few minutes, is how challenging it is at the local level to legislate issues, these constitutional issues that touch upon issues of homelessness, because all of us, folks who are currently sheltered and have permanent homes, and those who do not, have the same constitutional rights here. We all enjoy a freedom of speech to ask for things, right? To talk to others on the sidewalk. All of us enjoy a freedom of movement And that includes a right to travel and move about, and a right to not travel and to not move about. We all enjoy those freedoms in this country. And those are some of the constitutional issues that make legislating issues that touch upon homelessness at the local level a challenge sometimes. So taking the speech issue first, and solicitation, what sometimes are called panhandling ordinances, the most significant, I think, Colorado development in the law concerning panhandling and solicitation came about 6 years ago in 2015 in a challenge that was brought by the ACLU on behalf of a number of plaintiffs who challenged a City of Grand Junction panhandling or solicitation ordinance. Grand Junction had an ordinance that was quite common in Colorado and perhaps across the nation that prohibited solicitation in certain places and at certain times in certain manners. The ordinance, again, like many local ordinances, prohibited soliciting that was aggressive or threatening, that used fighting words or that threatened imminent harm to others, that involved the grabbing or touching of people, but also that was simply at nighttime, or within a certain number of feet or a certain radii around an ATM, or within a certain distance around a restaurant patio, or that involved repeated requests if the first request was denied without any other aggressive behavior, or that was at a bus stop or near a bus stop. So again, fairly common provisions in solicitation ordinances at the time. And the ACLU brought challenge to that City of Grand Junction ordinance with a number of plaintiffs, 4 folks who did solicit at various places, Greenpeace, who regularly solicited on the sidewalks of the city and asked for donations in some of these locations, and sometimes, yes, asked even twice after they were told no the first time. And another group who solicited aid for the poor in a charitable manner. So all these plaintiffs came together and challenged this ordinance in the Federal District Court of Colorado. And the court ended up concluding that the ordinance was indeed unconstitutional on the challenged grounds. And the ACLU wisely challenged only certain provisions of the ordinance. They did not challenge the provisions that prohibited aggressive or threatening solicitation, or that involved grabbing or the touching of people, but those that were around ATMs or around patios or just at night. And the district court judge agreed with that challenge and found that the challenged ordinance does not regulate speech in which a person asks for directions, simply asks for directions, or for a restaurant recommendation, or what do you have to eat, or for political support. Nor does the ordinance apply to people, said the judge, who simply pass the time with idle chit chat at the bus stop while waiting in line to use an ATM, or to enter a building at a sporting event, or a friendly greeting at a bus stop. So the judge found and concluded that the ordinance really was overbroad. And that's a common challenge for certain ordinances that include a lot of conduct and affect and prohibit a lot of conduct that is beyond the scope of the public harm that they are allegedly intended to address. So the court notes that, and I thought this was an interesting quote from the judge in this case. The court notes that certain behavior that may be engaged in by solicitors when soliciting could threaten public safety. For example, the solicitor may engage in conduct that is intimidating, threatening, coercive, or obscene, and that causes the person solicited to fear for his or her safety. At times, threatening behavior may accompany panhandling, but the correct solution is not to outlaw panhandling. The focus must be on the threatening behavior. So as we see begin in 2015 in the District Court of Colorado is a line of cases that say that simply criminalizing a wide swath of activity, maybe a sliver of which is truly a threat to the public safety. Those will be challenged and probably stricken for being overbroad. Quickly moving to camping. The anti-camping ordinances kind of evolved out of necessity in the late 20th century, challenges to loitering or vagrancy laws. One of the most well-known and earliest examples of a challenge to a local loitering law was in 1972, a city of Jacksonville anti-loitering, sometimes called vagrancy statutes, was challenged, and the United States Supreme Court in the early 70s invalidated that law. The Jacksonville law outlawed, prohibited loitering and outlawed it, and defined loiterers as persons wandering or strolling around from place to place without any lawful purpose or object. And considering that vague language, the court struck down that Jacksonville loitering or vagrancy law. Those were quite common near the end of the 20th century. And in response to more and more cases striking down loitering laws, the laws got more focused on particular activity, including camping. And that's what we have seen nationwide and what we have seen increasingly in Colorado. In response to more refined laws like anti-camping laws, significantly here in Colorado, that's been in the news recently, it has for about the last decade. And about a decade ago, in 2011, the city of Boulder successfully defended their anti-camping ordinance, which essentially prohibited nighttime camping on city property. Okay, so not private property where you have permission, or a KOA campground, or even a public campground that was designed or designated, but public parks, sidewalks. City of Boulder had, again, a pretty common anti-camping ordinance that prohibited that. That was challenged about a decade ago, and the district court in Boulder upheld that ordinance against a challenge that it violated the 8th Amendment and that it constituted cruel and unusual treatment under the law, because those folks were merely trying to survive. District court in Boulder said, no, this ordinance is narrowly tailored enough to pass muster. Fast forward ahead a little bit, in very significantly about 7 years later, on a federal level, the pretty significant decision came out nationwide from the 9th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. And the United States is on the federal level divided up into different circuits, and there are trial level courts in the many states in those circuits, and then there are appeals courts, the equivalent of our Court of Appeals on the state level, and those hear appeals from the various states into that circuit court. And then above all those circuit courts is the United States Supreme Court. The 9th Circuit significantly in 2018 decided a case called Martin versus the city of Boise. And city of Boise, as you know or has heard of, was challenged on the merits of its, again, anti-camping law, which is very similar to Boulder, which essentially outlawed camping at night in public spaces and public property. And that 9th Circuit federal decision is significant is because it was the first and only still standing circuit court decision to rule in favor of plaintiffs and indeed invalidate the camping ordinance as cruel and unusual under the 8th Amendment. And therefore, they struck down that city of Boise ordinance. I think what's interesting is some language in the decision. It's not very long, I'll read here. In analogizing to a previous case that the 9th Circuit had rendered about status crimes and about outlawing on the basis of one's status rather than on one's conduct, the court said, the 9th Circuit, this principle of no status crimes compels the conclusion that the 8th Amendment prohibits the imposition of criminal penalties for sitting, sleeping, or lying outside on public property for homeless individuals who cannot obtain shelter. As our previous decision reasoned, whether sitting, lying, and sleeping are defined as acts or conditions, they're universal and unavoidable consequences of being human. Moreover, any conduct at issue here is involuntary and inseparable from status. They're one and the same, given that human beings are biologically compelled to rest, whether by sitting, lying, or sleeping. As a result, just as the state may not criminalize the state of being homeless in public places, the state may not criminalize conduct that is an unavoidable consequence of being homeless, namely sitting, lying, or sleeping on the streets. This decision, again, was rather landmark because it was the first at that level to decide that an anti-camping ordinance was cruel and unusual punishment. The Supreme Court of the United States, because of course, the city of Boise wanted to appeal this, and the Supreme Court denied cert, which means that they let this Ninth Circuit decision stand. What does that mean here in Colorado? This Ninth Circuit case and decision is not binding law in Colorado because we are a member of the 10th Circuit. However, it is, of course, persuasive legal authority for our courts here in Colorado. So while this Martin v. Boise decision, again, does not set precedent for us, it is interesting and persuasive, maybe a roadmap to where case law is headed even here in Colorado. Real briefly, again, here, and I know my 10 minutes are about up, I will touch a little bit upon other action here on camping ordinances in Colorado. In Denver, in the May of 2019, perhaps you heard May is when Denver had their local elections. There was an initiative called Initiative 300 that was put on the ballot that actually aimed to strike down Denver's anti-camping ordinance. Some folks who are allies of the homeless and homeless advocates and groups got that on the ballot to strike down city and county of Denver's anti-camping ordinance. That initiative failed, and quite handily by most news reports, by about a margin of 5-1. So Denver's anti-camping ordinance, voters refused to overturn it voluntarily at the ballot box. However, in late 2019, Denver County Court struck down Denver's anti-camping ordinance, interestingly, following the Martin v. Boise rationale and thought process and legal analysis, and held that Denver's anti-camping ordinance, like the one in Boise, violated the 8th Amendment. That was appealed. It was overturned on appeal by the district court and remanded to the trial court level. Like so many court cases, they seem to go up and down and back and forth. There still is no resolution on that. However, interesting from a municipal perspective is that in the fall of 2019, as I'm sure most folks on this call or many know, the city and county of Denver created a new department called the Department of Housing Stability, or HOST. And that is a city and county department that is focused on housing stability issues and helping keep folks in the houses that they're in, helping folks quickly out of temporary situations of homelessness, and creating connections for people to housing opportunities in an effort to make housing more stable. But that was a real quick overview of, I think, the two main issues that we see play out in a constitutional level in regards to how issues affecting homelessness can implicate constitutional issues. And what I see from both the past evolution in case law and where we are today is an increasing willingness on courts to say that laws cannot be used as sort of a sword to address the symptoms or punish those who are experiencing homelessness. Rather, it's up to communities to, like Wheat Ridge is doing, examine how we might look at things more globally. It is not just a police issue. It is not just a law enforcement issue. There are real legal challenges to approaching it as just a legal or a law enforcement issue. So with that, Mayor, I will throw it to Kelli Barker.
I'll thank you, Carmen. And then Kelli, I'll turn it back to you to talk more about the specific regional approaches that we're using.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Carmen. That was really interesting, informative. So just really quickly, just going to talk about some of the work we've been doing in Jefferson County, and including Wheat Ridge, over the past really year and a half or so. There's a group that has been meeting in Jefferson County for over 10 years called Heading Home. And it's a committee of Jeffco Connections, which is the collaborative management program for the county. But the group that meets really to talk about and develop a systemic response to homelessness, to really reducing homelessness, preventing it where possible, and when not, ensuring it's a rare, brief, and one-time experience. And so with that, we've, over the course of the last year, and it's a very diverse group. As I mentioned, it's been in existence for over 10 years, has government representatives, nonprofit, faith-based, just concerned citizens. So it's open to the public. Anyone who's interested, we welcome you. You can shoot me an email. And there's also a way to get involved through the website. But over the past year, we have developed a homelessness action plan for the county. And through that, we've really looked at the data that we do have available that I mentioned earlier from the comprehensive homeless count, and really looked at, like, what is this data telling us? What is the story it's telling us about the services in Jefferson County, what's existent, what the needs are of people that we found during that count, and what they expressed that their needs are. So with that, we wrote the action plan, and with that, we created 4 priorities within that document that really outlines and focuses our work over the next 3 years as a committee. So those priorities include optimizing the crisis response systems. You can kind of think of that as the emergency department of a housing crisis response system. Like, we know that it's essential. We need to have proper infrastructure and safety net in place for people that are experiencing housing crises, so we can prevent people from falling into homelessness when possible. And for folks that are already in homelessness, how can we really meet basic needs, provide emergency shelter, provide street outreach, all of those pieces of an emergency response system? How can we make sure we have a really robust system in place? So that group is meeting on that. The second priority is increasing our supply of supportive housing. So supportive housing is typically the most best practice evidence-based housing model for people that are experiencing chronic homelessness. So that I mentioned earlier, that kind of tip of the iceberg, 20%-ish of people that are homeless that have long histories, that have health conditions, disabilities. How can we increase? We do not have enough supportive housing in Jefferson County to meet that need. So how can we really develop more supportive housing units and increase access to those units as well? That third priority is increasing our data collection and sharing system-wide. As I mentioned, we did that census count. I mentioned it's almost 2 years old already, so we don't really have a robust data system that can tell us at any given time, how are these numbers changing in homelessness? What are the causes and characteristics of people with this experience? And we need to be able to have a pulse on that. So we're really working on increasing service provider participation in what's called a homeless management information system, which is a metro-wide, truly statewide database on people that are experiencing homelessness and kind of what the characteristics and needs are. And then lastly, our priority is really increasing community involvement and support of solutions to homelessness. We know there's no shortage of individuals that will come and speak out against affordable housing developments and things like that. So this group really, we try and find ways that we know there's also a lot of community interest in developing solutions. And I hope many of those individuals are on this call. I expect many of those individuals are as well. So how can we create opportunities for people to really create solutions to this problem? And that's the only thing that's really going to drive down the issue. So we're working on that. So our homelessness action plan is posted on the Heading Home webpage. It's just www.headinghomejeffco.com. You can Google it as well. And you can read much more information, as well as a link to that comprehensive homeless account report with a lot more data in that. So some of the solutions we've gotten in place over the course of the last year, we've stood up quite a few initiatives in the county to address this issue from multiple angles. The Homeless Navigation Collaborative is probably the biggest one, and Wheat Ridge Homeless Navigator is here on the call, who will speak next, Rebekah Raudabaugh. And that's been stood up in the last year. It's comprised of 7 homeless navigators. So they really work with people experiencing homelessness to navigate them to housing pathway of their choice. And again, Rebekah will speak more to that. But the navigators are housed within different municipalities throughout Jefferson County, as well as human services. And we really function as a team. So this is a really innovative model. It's innovative in that we're all employed and able to be really flexible and meet the needs of our individual jurisdictions, but we also work as a team and support each other and share information and really collaborate. So I think it's a really effective model for a county like ours with lots of jurisdictions and municipalities. We've also launched what's called Built for Zero initiative. That's really a countywide effort and truly region. We have a countywide initiative. It's part of a regional-wide effort to basically systemically drive reductions in specific subpopulations. So we're, for example, working with driving down reductions in homelessness among veterans homeless population to start. And there's a lot of pieces to that, and I'm happy to provide more information on that as well. But that is a really exciting initiative. We also stood up a non-congregate shelter. It was actually at a hotel in Wheat Ridge. It was last summer for a couple of months, and that was for specifically to provide housing for homeless individuals who have been tested positive for COVID. So it's a place to isolate and really recover. So that was stood down, and now we're working with Denver. We have a partnership with Denver to use their facility for anybody in that same situation. We've also stood up, and I wasn't directly involved with this, but it certainly affects the homeless population, is the LEAD program that Lakewood is in the midst of standing up. And that's Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. It's really a community-based diversion approach with the goals of improving public safety and public order, but also reducing unnecessary justice system involvement for people that participate in the program. So basically, it really diverts individuals to case managers for law violations that are really driven by crimes related to homelessness and survival and behavioral health needs. So I think that will also make a dent in this issue. In addition, we've a new program called Community Connection Center was stood up in Lakewood. I think it's kind of on the border of Lakewood and Golden, but it's called C3. So that's sort of a central resource hub for people that are involved in the justice system. So a lot of folks that are experiencing homelessness, it's just a one-stop shop to access resources specific to those needs. And then likewise, a similar model was stood up called Porchlight Family Justice Center. And that's also a very collaborative kind of resource hub sort of model, but that's specifically for victims of crime. So that could certainly is a resource that people experiencing homelessness can benefit from and will certainly need. And then lastly, we've received, will be receiving quite a bit of money from the American Rescue Plan Act through the county and many of the cities. And so we're really just at the preliminary stages of trying to put together some proposals to stand up some resources and housing resources, and specifically that'll address some of these gaps in our system. So we're busy working on that and planning on that and really being very thoughtful about doing a gaps analysis and developing solutions to address those gaps using these really once in a lifetime funds available. So we're really excited about that and more to come on that. And then just lastly, just some ways of how to get involved in the solutions to homelessness. We are going to be posting more information on our Heading Home website about specific ways to get involved and at different levels, and that'll really be able to meet anybody's needs who wants to be part of developing solutions to this issue. So the best way is to really get on our listserv, which you can do on our website. But there's a myriad of ways to get involved, from donating tangible items, donating funds. Wheat Ridge has a foundation, I think someone will probably speak to later, that you could donate to, that goes to our Navigator, assisting the individuals that she works with. There's multiple organizations in Wheat Ridge and throughout the county that you can volunteer your time. And then, showing up and speaking up in support of these solutions if this is something that you believe in, and it's important to be at the table. It's important to be at community meetings like this, at public hearings. Those voices are heard, and on both sides. But I know that a lot of people that are in support of solutions are often folks that may not have time or energy or whatnot to attend meetings like that. So to the extent you do have that time and energy, it's really important to be visible in support of solutions. I will stop there and turn it to Rebekah.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. I'm excited now to introduce Rebekah Raudabaugh, the homeless navigator for the cities of Wheat Ridge, Golden, and Edgewater. Rebekah has extensive experience working in the social work field with individuals experiencing homelessness. Most recently, she worked as a case manager for Urban Peak, a nonprofit in Denver that assists individuals experiencing homelessness with meeting their goals and becoming self-sufficient. She has expertise using strength-based case management and trauma-informed care, and is certified in mental health first aid. Rebekah received a degree in criminology and criminal justice with a minor in psychology from the University of South Carolina. Rebekah, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor stated, my name's Rebekah. I'm the homeless navigator, not only for Wheat Ridge, but I also serve the cities of Golden and Edgewater. As Kelly mentioned, my position was kind of brought on as part of the countywide navigation model that was launched in 2020. And my primary role as a housing navigator is to navigate persons experiencing a housing crisis into stable housing and help them obtain the services and resources needed to obtain and maintain that housing. While I don't add to the number of housing resources available, I directly help persons experiencing homelessness to identify solutions to complex health and housing challenges and support persons seeking a pathway out of homelessness. I work pretty closely with the local businesses, the local business community, constituents, metro area nonprofit providers, and government agencies. I'm working pretty closely with the courts and the police departments in each of the 3 cities for when they contact individuals who are asking for resources and want to work towards stable housing. They can fill out a referral form, and then I can follow up with those individuals, or they can reach out to me. Additionally, I've been conducting weekly outreach in Wheat Ridge. My outreach efforts consist of going out with Officer Gross from the crime prevention team to high trafficked areas or areas where individuals experiencing homelessness tend to congregate. On these outreach efforts, I offer resources and small basic need items like socks, gloves, snacks, to kind of help build rapport with those clients. The idea behind this being that it kind of takes time to build trust and build rapport with individuals or families who may have had negative interactions with either service providers or the police. So I'm really just meeting people where they're at on the street, or wherever they may be, and kind of getting to know them and providing them with any resources on the spot or connecting with them after the fact. Over time, clients are more willing to trust me, and they're more willing to kind of open up about some of the issues they might be experiencing. So that allows me to provide the appropriate resources for those individuals. Some people I outreach on the first time, they want to get connected with me. Sometimes it takes 3 to 5 times before people feel comfortable that they can trust me and start working with me. When I meet, kind of a little bit more about the process of what it's like when I'm working with an individual. I'll meet with an individual, I'll complete an intake with them that I can use to kind of assess the client's needs and barriers. And from that intake, it kind of asks questions around how long the individual has been experiencing homelessness, their disabilities, mental health, substance use, income, and reasons that people feel contributed to their homelessness. And these are all self-identified. But again, it gives me kind of a good idea of how I can assist these individuals and what resources may or may not be appropriate to them. And again, the more rapport I build with these clients, they're more open to being honest when I'm asking about these questions so that I can provide the appropriate resources. Next steps after completing an intake, I'll kind of work with the client to identify a pathway towards housing. Depending on the client's circumstances and barriers, it can take a while before, or just the timing for a client to be housed can differ tremendously. Depending on their circumstances and the resources available, it could take 3 to 4 months or a couple of years. And that 3 to 4 months timeframe is kind of if everything fell into place perfectly. They had all of their vital docs, meaning birth certificate, social security card, and birth certificate, and an ID. And then everything fell perfectly into place, which we know that tends not to happen because a lot of my work is working with individuals to obtain their vital docs. Right now, I currently have an actively growing caseload of around 25 clients or so. Of that number, I have 2 clients that are being matched or have been selected to apply for a housing program. They're working on gathering the necessary documentation. A little bit more about kind of the outreach efforts I'm doing. From outreach, I met an individual and have been working pretty closely with that individual since then. And that individual's been selected for a housing voucher and working towards it. But I've been working with this client for about 3 months now, and we're still a distance away. So that can kind of give you an idea of how long it can take, or just some of the barriers that it takes to get to housing. And even though this individual that I'm working with, they're currently living unsheltered, meaning that every day they don't know where their next meal is coming from, where they're going to be able to use a restroom, or if they're going to find a safe place to sleep at night. On top of those barriers that this individual is facing on a daily basis, they still have to figure out how to get to their necessary appointment for housing or follow up with any housing documents they may need while still making sure their basic needs are being met. Additionally, they don't have access to a phone or computer, so that can make it very difficult for them to follow up with an appointment if they are going to be late or if they missed it, or to reschedule. So that's just another barrier that this individual and many other individuals who are living unsheltered face every day. Since I've started working with this individual, they have been able to obtain their vital docs, so their social security card, birth certificate, and ID, and have been able to connect with mental health resources, but they're not to housing yet. They still have a lot of work ahead of them, which with some of those barriers I mentioned is going to make it a little bit harder. Additionally, share another story with a client that I'm working with. I'm working with another individual who lost their job at the beginning of the pandemic. When they lost their job, it was kind of a ripple effect. They lost their housing. They started living in their vehicle, but then they lost their vehicle due to not being able to make payments. And kind of as a result of that, this client's living on the streets and living unsheltered. Every day, that client is kind of unaware of where they're going to sleep in the night, kind of the same as the client I was talking about before. The client reported that they're actively looking for employment, but oftentimes they have to put their search on hold to ensure that their basic needs are being met daily. Another barrier that this client faces is kind of storing and making sure that their belongings are protected. In the past, they kind of had their belongings stolen, and that's everything they own right on them. So this individual takes their belongings with them everywhere they go, meaning that if they have a job interview, if they're going to an appointment somewhere, they take their belongings. And not only is this a physical strain on this person, but it's it's mentally exhausting to carry it and worry about, is my stuff going to get stolen? Am I going to sleep at night? Where am I going to sleep that's safe tonight? And so it's kind of it's very challenging for these individuals to kind of overstep or overcome those barriers while trying to get their basic needs met every day. And again, these are just 2 examples of clients that I'm working with. I just kind of wanted to lay out some of the barriers that they're facing every day and kind of talk a little bit more about the process towards housing and how long it can be and how it's not as simple. It's more complex than it may seem on the surface. Additionally, I don't want to echo too much of what Kelli was stating, but Heading Home will be coming out with more ways to kind of get involved within the community. Additionally, more specific to Wheat Ridge, if you want to get involved, we do take donations through the Wheat Ridge Community Foundation. And then again, just keep checking back with the Heading Home, and there may be more additional ways that you can get involved, like volunteering your time or monetary donation at local agencies that we partner with. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebekah. Now I'm excited for you all to meet Randle Loeb. Randle was diagnosed as manic depressive, but not until he was homeless and living on the street at age 55. His work thereafter has been dedicated to ending poverty of the spirit and finding lasting solutions for early childhood trauma. He holds Master of Science and Master of Divinity degrees and has written a book entitled A Short Bio of a Man with a Brain on Fire. He's a father of 3, grandfather of 10, and is thriving. Thank you for joining us tonight, Randle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wrote that, so he's not responsible for those thoughts. The problem of homelessness is a matter of economic margins, which grow greater and greater. Most of us who live in extreme poverty, it's a generational issue. It's not an episodic one. It's not a chronic homeless one. And the federal government involved in it sort of misunderstands in its description who it is that we're really talking about. We're talking about, in many cases, the quality of life that is jeopardized by the fact that the person lives in poverty. And I was on a call for the 5-year strategic plan this morning of Denver, and a couple of other things that perked my thoughts. And I felt like, in a certain sense, we all have a responsibility, because we are interdependent, to make sure that people are, first of all, safe, and secondly, that we have a way that we all can share a certain standard of living. Now, I listened to Councilwoman Kanish, as I told the mayor, talk about the fact that we have people who are getting the subsidies, who are in these places, but they're actually paying rent. They're not getting free housing. And I think there's a great deal of distrust for anybody who in America makes it possible for a person to be safe and improve the quality of their life, as if there should be some problem with that, regardless of who you are, where you came from, or what's going on. In my case, because that's what people would like to hear, I was born manic depressive. In other words, it wasn't like something that just sprung up at the age of 25 or something like that. And I wasn't diagnosed, as he said, until much later, double that in terms of my life at least. And so I struggled most of the time trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And early childhood trauma, which is the elephant in the room, is not really understood well enough to understand what generational poverty does to people when they're born and grow up in a situation where they feel unsafe and where they feel like they're not going to make it. And in my case, it got to a point, as the mayor said, that I didn't want my life to continue. And it was a great challenge to me to breathe, to go on with it, to continue to push buttons to get to what I needed to do, to be selfish about myself, and to actually ask people what it is that we could do in order to improve this. And so we need to basically be more active listeners. I'm trained as a chaplain. We need to be able to not just respond to a person's story by repeating our story, but we need to also be able to exercise empowerment of that person to understand that it's all within the scope of your struggling with this, that you will make it and go to a place where you're safe and where the quality of your life improves, and you can then pay it forward and do this with other people. Now, you can see by virtue of how I express myself that I don't need notes and I don't stand behind anything. It comes straight out of my heart. And a lot of times that's misunderstood, the intensity that I have, the way in which I basically go about my business. I'm very straightforward about it, the way I was raised. And I ask questions all the time. But many of the people who I work with, who I've known, whose stories have been expressed here, they get beaten down to a point where they feel like there's no tomorrow, where they have to accept this limitation. And so we have people who are outside who refuse to come in because they want to basically be left alone. And that's of all types of people. I don't care about whether or not the race or the gender or the gender preference or whatever it is or where you came from. It's pretty much obvious. So there's a program that exists in Oregon called Cahoots. And there was a bill that was just pushed through the legislature this session that had to do with people who are not in law enforcement as the first responders to people who are outside, and basically attempting to make it possible for them to understand one another and to listen actively to what's going on so that they can make a proper referral. There's also, as it was expressed, peer mentors who are involved in the struggle because they're still struggling. My struggle never will end. I'm 70 years old, and by the last day of my life, I assure you, I will still be demanding that I have a right to be here and a right to live in a certain way and to have a certain quality of life for the people who I love. And I think that that's important for us to understand, that that person who is struggling probably wants to have a purpose, probably wants to work, probably wants to take care of themselves and their family, probably wants to go beyond the margins that they have to experience. So I challenge you, and even in heading home, which I participate in, I wish that we would basically be more patient with one another and stop acting as if we know the answer, when the answer has to come from me. Thank you very much. My pleasure to address you. I really feel honored by it.
Randle, thank you very much for sharing your story. And now I'd like to turn it over to Wheat Ridge City Manager Patrick Goff, who will talk about the city's response to the homeless situation. Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you promoted me to mayor earlier, but or maybe it's a demotion. I don't know. But thank you. And we're already at an hour, and I know we have a lot of people on the call, so I'll try to catch up some time here so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. We want to make sure that those folks who spent their time with us this evening have that opportunity. So I don't want to go through this too quickly because I want to talk about what we are doing as a city. And I do have a pretty long list of items here that we're doing at the city level to try to address some of these issues we've been talking about this evening. So first of all, City Council has prioritized homelessness as a top priority in their strategic plan this year. We had a retreat back in February, and homelessness and the impacts has risen to the top as a priority. So there's going to be strategic actions and conversations to address these issues associated with homelessness and over the next year or so, and it will be a primary focus for us. Staff will be providing updates to City Council next Monday already, May 17th, and then again on August 2nd. And I'm sure there'll be many other meetings where we'll be talking about this. But Kelli Barker will be coming back on May 17th. Thank you, Kelli, to give us a more detailed description of what Heading Home is doing and the Built for Zero program. She only had a few minutes this evening. So if you want to hear more about those programs, please come to our May 17th meeting. It'll still be virtual format. You can find that information on our city's website. And we here at the city, we do have an internal homeless working group of staff from across all city departments, including our public works and parks and recreation, police department, and the city manager's office. We meet on a regular basis. We just had a meeting, I believe yesterday, and we meet to coordinate our efforts that we're all working on separately in every department to address homelessness issues throughout the city. And in addition to what you've heard from both Kelli and Rebekah tonight, the city is also putting other resources towards these efforts. And one item that we're going to do, and the police chief's on here, and he can speak to this later if you would like. We are going to be beefing up our staffing this spring and summer to deal with some of these issues. We have 2 school resource officers who will be done with their duties at the schools here in a few weeks. and they're going to join an additional police officer and Officer Brian Gross, who I believe some of you on the call have met already. They're going to work as a team this summer and spring to be specifically dedicated to the homelessness issues in Wheat Ridge. We're going to have extra Greenbelt, extra duty along the Greenbelt with park rangers that we hired during the summer, and we're hoping to hire a third, potentially additional park ranger this summer to help out. Our traffic team in the police department is going to reallocate or move all of their unallocated time when they're not working on other issues to the I-70 Kipling area this summer to provide a better presence of a police department in that area. Police department's also applying for other additional grants to help pay for additional overtime for police officers to focus on these issues. And our Parks Department is also looking at hiring additional seasonal staff this summer that will be trained and skilled in biohazard cleanups and more specific cleanups to help with some of the issues that we're seeing in our major corridors. We do have monthly cleanups scheduled with the Colorado Department of Transportation. We may pick that up to twice a month during the summer if we can. It's really dependent on CDOT and the staff that they have available for that. But our next CDOT cleanup event is coming up here on May 24th, and that focuses on those areas primarily in the CDOT right-of-way under the interstate, primarily at I-70 and Kipling, but any other areas that CDOT has property. We are looking here at the city at different type of landscape design, specifically at the four corners, we call it, at I-70 and Kipling to discourage camping. There's different things you can do to discourage camping in certain areas in the city. We just hired a contractor to help our staff do cleanups. They're going to do cleanups twice a month in different areas of the city, and that will supplement what staff is doing on a daily basis at this point. That contract should start here in the next week or two. So that should help out with some of the garbage and trash that we're seeing in some areas of the city. We're also working with a lot of volunteer groups across the city and to plan and organize regular cleanup events across the city. Would love to have anyone on the call tonight participate in that in any way they can. We will have more information on the city's website for that. But Local Works, which is a partner of the city, is committing to community cleanups all summer long. And their first one is this weekend, May 15th. And this one's going to focus on the 38th Avenue area in Wadsworth. But they do have events scheduled for June 26th, July 24th, August 21st, and September 25th. They haven't decided on the locations for all of those, but they will, depending on what areas are needed to be cleaned up the most during those months, that's probably the areas that they'll choose. The Wheat Ridge Chamber does also have a cleanup scheduled for May 22nd, and they're going to focus on Kipling between I-70 and 44th. So if you're familiar with the Wheat Ridge Chamber, you can reach out to them and see if you can join them. And city staff just today, numerous staff from different departments did an assessment of the Greenbelt to identify and notify campers that their camp locations are going to have to be removed, and those will be removed tomorrow. We do provide at least 24-hour notice so that those individuals can collect and move their personal items before we move those camps away. So that's going to happen tomorrow. Our Public Works Department is increasing street sweeping in many of these areas that we're focusing on, specifically I-70 and Kipling area and 38th and Wadsworth. They're going to be doing that at least weekly through the summer or more as needed. So a lot of city activities throughout all of our different departments, and that's going to be increasing over the summer, we believe. So in general, too, the city is contributing about just over $200,000 a year that we contribute to area nonprofits and agencies that do assist with homelessness, mental health, addiction, family services, and many other different issues in the city. So the city is contributing to those agencies that help out And I believe, as Kelli mentioned, the city is going to receive some additional stimulus funding from Congress very soon. And some of those funds can be used for homelessness programs and services. And Kelli and I have been communicating over the last few days. We are looking at some potential housing options in Lakewood that would provide a place for Rebekah to refer some of her clients to on a temporary basis while they're looking for some long-term housing. So we're hoping that will come to fruition. City Council has and is also working on several legislative efforts to address some of these issues also. In January of this year, City Council passed ordinances concerning trespassing and the illegal removal or defacing of notices on public property, specifically no trespassing signs. So the police department has a little bit more teeth there to ask people to move on from areas that we have no trespassing signs, or private property has put up no trespassing signs. On May 17th, Monday, again, just this next Monday, City Council is going to be looking at two new potential ordinances. One is concerning pedestrians hindering the flow of traffic, and the other one is pedestrians using roadway center medians. We're going to be looking at those mainly from a safety issue. We do see a lot of folks that camp out basically, or stand or sit in center medians, and a lot of the medians are in very high traffic areas, and there's a huge safety issue that we're concerned that those individuals are going to get injured or hurt. So City Council is going to be discussing that on Monday. Staff is also currently working with our city attorney to draft some legislation to require our motels in the city to obtain a separate license to operate as a motel, so that they have to meet certain standards to basically remain in business and remain in compliance with their motel license. So we're working on that with the police department and the city attorney's office, and hope to bring that back soon to City Council for approval. We hope that will address some of the issues that we see around some of our hotels and motels at I-70 Kipling. And one other piece of legislation that we're potentially going to bring forward to City Council is regulating our motels that some have been turning into more of extended stay motels. And people are, they're not staying for a couple nights, they're staying for months at a time or weeks at a time. And a lot of our motels, most of our motels are not extended stay motels. They don't have the facilities or the amenities to house people safely for long term. So we're going to be looking at that to see how we can make sure that if the motels are going to be providing long-term stays, that they're providing the correct amenities that the residents need. So those are, I'll stop there. Those are many of the things that the city's working on. A lot of what you heard about tonight, and I think the mayor will probably mention this at the end of our meeting. A lot of this information you heard tonight is going to be, we're going to put it all in one place. It's on What's Up Wheat Ridge. If you just Google What's Up Wheat Ridge, you can go to that site and you'll find a tab on there about homelessness issues, and you'll find a lot of this information. So Mayor, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to all of our panelists. Great volume of really terrific information. We really appreciate it. We are now ready to take your questions. Once again, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom at the bottom. We will read the questions and ask one of our panelists to answer. If you prefer, you may raise your hand in the Zoom platform and we will bring you onto the screen, and you may ask your question of yourself. Out of respect for our time, which is running short now, please keep your questions brief, no more than a minute or two. If you would like to ask a question by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and let us know you have a question. You will then press *6 to unmute yourself. And I'm going to go to Allie and her team to see what we have in the way of questions.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, we have some here. So I'll start with this one. What are some creative ways that the process for getting people housed can be improved time-wise? And so thanks, Hugh, for that question. I think, Rebekah, you were talking about sort of the process, right? The amount of time it takes. And I'm just, are there any, for you or perhaps Kelly, any thoughts about how that can be improved?
With that, I think it's very challenging with some of the challenges that I kind of mentioned, and we're actively kind of thinking of creative ways of how we can speed up this process. But there's just a lot of complex barriers that the individual does have to face. And so we're actively thinking about that.
Thanks, Rebekah.
Maybe to add to that, Allie, and at the meeting on Monday night with City Council, Rebekah and Mary Ann, who's popped up on the screen now, will be proposing to City Council that we potentially look at a housing navigator to help Rebekah with that process of getting people housed, because it's a very complicated process, and Rebekah doesn't have time to meet with new clients and also go through the whole housing process. So that is one recommendation that we may take to council.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I think some other questions about affordable housing. So, very concerned about the lack of affordable housing. We've had some folks also write in saying that they themselves are struggling, frankly, to they work, they're struggling to sort of pay rent and keep up with everything else. Just any thoughts about what are we as a city doing with regards to affordable housing? Is there anything we can be doing to compel developers, for example, to provide affordable housing in the city? I think, Patrick, that might be a good question for you.
Yeah, it's a very, very fair question, and it's very difficult. I think I responded to one question from earlier this evening that we hear this from a lot of folks, not truly homeless people, right? We have a lot of working folks that can't afford housing in Colorado. Colorado is very expensive housing. There's a lot of places in the country that are very expensive with housing. I think one of the questions was, why is it so expensive? I'm not sure if I can answer that this evening, but Colorado is a very popular place. A lot of people are moving here, and housing is in high demand. There's not much on the market today, so that increases prices. But we do have a lot of resources out there. We do have a Foothills Regional Housing, which is they're doing business as Foothills Regional Housing. They are our Jefferson County Housing Authority, but they do provide properties. So they own properties throughout Jefferson County. Quite a few of those are in Wheat Ridge, and they have many, many units that are available for folks that are as low as the 30% average median income, and as high as 60%. 60% are the working poor, people that have a decent job and are making decent money, but they still can't afford a place. So that's one resource. Jefferson County Health and Human Services also has other resources to help with housing needs. The city of Wheat Ridge has participated in several projects to provide low-income housing for seniors. We also are working with Foothills Regional Housing right now. The city's contributed $6 million worth of private activity bonds to do a large renovation of the Caesar Square project. I think, Mayor, if you remember, it's 100 and can't remember how many units is in that building.
110 or 120, somewhere in there.
Yeah, which will be all dedicated as affordable. So there's income restrictions, and I know those probably get taken up very quickly, but those are some of the projects that we've worked on in the city. We don't currently have a requirement that a developer includes affordable projects within their project in their new developments, but that might be something that City Council will look at in the future.
And also with that, Patrick, we've dedicated our bonding revenues to support a project just over the city line in Arvada at, I can't recall the exact name of it, but it's
Allison Village.
Yes, Allison Village, and I think they're setting aside 30 of those units for young people coming out of foster care,
Yep.
and also 30% AMI adjusted housing. So those are several of the projects that we can that we support.
And also some veterans. I think they're reserving some for some veterans, and
Also.
yeah, and I'm not sure how far we can go into this. We're still in discussions, but Kelly, is it safe or fair to briefly mention that we're looking at 2 navigation centers in the county that will include wraparound navigation services for individuals experiencing homelessness, but also provide both short-term and long-term housing, hopefully. And we're looking for 2 locations in the county. We're hoping to use some of the stimulus funding that Kelly mentioned earlier to pay for that, some tax credit financing, working with a couple different developers that would provide up to, I think we're hopefully maybe 300 units of permanent affordable housing in the county.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, we have lots more questions here if you'd like us to go on.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for these great questions. Perhaps Rebekah or Kelly could answer this one. Just a question from Pat. How many homeless in Wheat Ridge are families with children? Do we know that or have a sort of an estimate?
I do. Let me pull that really quickly. Yeah, we counted on, again, that month-long count in 2019, we counted 7 households that had at least 1 adult and 1 child, and 58 households without children.
Thanks, Kelly.
It's probably an undercount a little bit, but that's the best we have.
Thanks. A question, are there things that local businesses can do to help the city with this issue? I'm not sure who, what a great question. I'm not sure who the best person is to tackle that one.
Maybe the chief, Allie, I know the chief and the police department are reaching out and speaking with all of our businesses about this because of their concerns and trying to build partnerships with them. Chief, do you have anything maybe on that?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. We do spend a lot of time communicating with our business folks here in Wheat Ridge, and what we're trying to find out is what do they need, what help are they looking for, what assistance are they in need of. So we're really asking instead of going and asking for them to directly assist us, we're asking what we can do for them more often than not. But I think their participation in this issue is critical to our success. We've worked with many of these businesses to establish no trespass areas for places that they believe persons experiencing homelessness chronically tend to congregate, and that they're not interested in that. So we partner with them very well. We work with the businesses to help them report their crimes. We certainly don't know the magnitude of the issues unless they're reported to us. So reporting crimes directly or indirectly to the police department is a part of that. So we want to keep that communication open, and we want to give them tips. Sometimes we'll send out somebody if they're experiencing what they believe is a crime surge or what is a crime surge, somebody out to do a security evaluation of their property. And so we can give them some tips on how they might better secure their property in that area especially, but we do that throughout the city. I see Officer Gross is on here, and I know Officer Gross is our officer assigned specifically to that area where we see the majority, I think, of our persons experiencing homelessness up at I-70 in Kipling. And that's new for us in the police department. He's doing a fantastic job. And I think Brian could probably add a little more to this conversation as well. Brian?
Thanks, Chief. Working with the different business owners and business leaders in the area, and just working and trying to figure out what we can do to help them and partner with the community. So realistically, we can do CEPTEDs, which is crime prevention through environmental design. We can go through and do some evaluation and kind of give them help about reducing crime and reducing opportunities for crime in that area. I welcome people to stop me and ask questions about working with the homeless population and what they can do or what options there are available for them. I think a lot of the conversations that I've had that gives an understanding from a law enforcement perspective of what we can and can't do, and some of the hindrances and what we're able to enforce at currently gives them understanding that there are things being done, there are some obstacles that we're overcoming, but also we're trying to do it in a different way. We're not trying to force our hand anywhere in the community, but my goal and objective is to build those relationships like Rebekah does with the community, and try to understand where they're coming from and direct traffic to where they're most needed. If I can get them turned on to Rebekah's services and be able to do an intake with her or other services in the community, to me, that's a win. It's not just pushing people to different areas in the city or different cities. It's really working in collaboration with things all together. I've met with crime prevention department, similar roles with the city of Lakewood. They have a CAT team that deals with this issue. And then this morning I had a meeting with Arvada with their core team about this issue as well. You know, I-70 and Kipling, we share with Arvada, and that jurisdiction is kind of blurred. It's difficult. The city section maps are a little wonky unless you're familiar with what you're looking at. So my goal is to work with other jurisdictions too and see how we can help each other out, as well as we deal with interact with the same people constantly, and just kind of make sure that we're understanding the needs in the area, as well as helping to address the needs of the community, and to have that shared responsibility. So folks from Arvada have a voice. They can talk to me if they're concerned with I-70 and Kipling, and I listen to them, make sure that we address their needs specifically. And if it's more towards 26 in Kipling or 26 in Wadsworth corridor, I work with Lakewood and make sure that we deal with those directly. So I think we're trying to be out in force. It was mentioned earlier that I'm going to have a couple officers tag team with me to go out in the community. One, it's a great way to get out and involve ourselves in the Greenbelt and make sure we're addressing issues, even public issues that are out there that we may not know about from a law enforcement perspective, because they see it and they don't want to call. But they see a couple of officers walking the Greenbelt, they feel they can approach us and say hi, and I'll reach out to them. I'm not shy, and make sure that if there's anything they're concerned with, we can address it there too. And I think this multifaceted approach is really going to be important moving forward. I've had a lot of success just interacting with people and getting to know people in the community better in this role. I've had 10 years in law enforcement with the city of Wheat Ridge prior to coming up here in crime prevention. But I'm looking forward to, if anybody on this call has questions or concerns, they can always track me down and say hello. I'd love to talk to you, and let me know how I can help you in any way.
Thanks, Patrick. If I can add one more thing to that, you know, the question I think was what can businesses do? We've seen at 38th and Wadsworth, we put a lot of focus on the shopping plaza up there, and what we found was an inconsistent dynamic up there from different businesses. And we worked to bring those groups together to find out what it is they wanted. And we've seen a fairly successful outcome in that area around Town Center Park there and around the business area around there, because they came together, decided on an approach that they all could agree on, and we were able to back them up with some enforcement and services. Certainly, we don't want to be an occupying force. We're out there to help as much as we can, as Officer Gross, I think, illustrates, but the cohesiveness and our ability to be a central figure in those conversations is something that we're willing to do, and we think that we're pretty successful at it.
Thank you. Patrick, I've got a comment and then a question. The comment is no question, just a comment. It seems like the redevelopment of the Lutheran campus is an opportunity for high density housing, which helps make housing more affordable and accessible. And then I have another question. Who is in charge of cleaning up bus stations along the 38th Avenue corridor? Many times we see trash and clothing and even tents in small areas where the homeless are living in these stations. Many of us travel on buses to our jobs downtown and can be safe in the stations, get under shelter when the bad weather hits, etc.
Yeah, I think the chief has his hand up, but I'll address that to start. most of those shelters are owned and maintained and operated by RTD. And the chief and the police department and our public works department are trying to work with RTD on that issue. We see it, and I understand the frustration, and at some of the things that Carmen Beery mentioned earlier, though, too, it's people can sit on the bench if they want all day, and there's not much we can do. They can't necessarily hinder, I believe, or camp out overnight. So there's different situations there, but the chief can speak to that. So, and then speaking the comment on Lutheran, that is a great comment, and we are right in the middle of a community outreach process on the Lutheran campus to discuss what that campus should be and what it should look like in the future. So if you support density in your community in Wheat Ridge, please go to What's Up Wheat Ridge, and there is a project tab on there about the Lutheran campus master plan, and please leave your comments on that. Chief, you want to address the bus stops?
Yeah, I think you pretty much were spot on, Patrick. RTD is responsible, but we certainly feel like we are backfilling that role. RTD is stretched very thin, and they really focus a lot of their attention on the city core and the train lines. So we've tried, we've been very diligent in our efforts to try and alter some of the landscape of those bus stops, either removing them as shelters and just creating a bench or other opportunities. But it really is a long process to get that done. It seems like it's a very bureaucratic process, and we haven't been very successful. We do work alongside of RTD when we can to patrol that area, but it does become an issue, a constitutional issue, as to whether we can simply remove people because they haven't taken a bus in an hour or two. So they do tend to gather at those locations. And quite frankly, persons experiencing homelessness know where they can and can't go. They talk, the community is very tight knit, and they understand their rights pretty well. So we are certainly respectful of their rights, and they're very clear on what they know.
Oh, Mary, you're on mute.
Thank you. Did you see another question in the chat, in the Q&A?
Yes, and I'll just add it's 8 o'clock. So thanks for hanging in there with us. If we can all stick around a little bit longer, we do have a couple more good questions. We have a lot of good questions, actually. And I think some of them, what we'll do is we'll work on them, posting them on What's Up Wheat Ridge with answers, so we can get to those. And we do have some folks with their hands up, and we want to get to them as well. But there have been some questions around panhandling, and in terms of, what are our plans? Is there anything that can be done? Perhaps it's challenging, unsightly, scary to people. So I wonder if the chief might be willing to, or Carmen might be willing to address that. And then I have one more, and then we'll go to folks who are speaking, if that's okay with you, Mayor.
Very good.
So I can weigh in, but I've learned that letting the lawyer speak first is always my best option. So I always defer to Carmen first.
So Carmen, if you have a quick sort of response to if there's, whether it's constitutionally or what can be done around panhandling.
Yeah, you bet, Ellie and Chief. I'm happy to address that. Again, this fortunately is something that we do have some guidance in Colorado in terms of the law and the Grand Junction decision that I mentioned earlier. While it is quite clear that the mere act of asking for something from another, from soliciting, whether it's money or anything else of value or directions or recommendation, that quite clearly is speech that folks are allowed to engage in public places. What the city can do under the law is address when that speech, when soliciting speech is accompanied by conduct that presents a risk or a threat. As Patrick mentioned, and as council will talk about this coming Monday, the act of perhaps walking into the roadway. That's clearly something that puts both the asker, the solicitor, and maybe others at risk. That is conduct that the city can address and prohibit. Again, in the Grand Junction case, parts of the panhandling or solicitation ordinance that were not challenged, and wisely so, were the elements of the ordinance that involved being aggressive with people, actually touching them, with preventing them from walking where they wanted to walk or pass. Those kinds of activities are, we are able to regulate and prohibit as a city. And it's sort of those coupled with the soliciting speech that is essential for us to defend those ordinances. Chief, do you have anything to add?
So, yeah, I just want to be clear that when I think maybe it was Patrick and I started discussing some of these ordinances, and Jim Lawrence is on as well, we were talking about really a safety issue. Now, we understand that the individuals who are soliciting charitable donations certainly tend to be persons experiencing homelessness, but last year, we had an individual who was struck and killed at I-70 in Kipling, a person experiencing homelessness. We've seen people in the median who are certainly do not appear to be stable, falling into the street. We've seen individuals who bring children, bring their pets, sometimes unleashed, into the median. And it really, to be clear, there's a separate issue here. It's just the safety of individuals that I think is really paramount. They happen to be people soliciting charitable donations, but I would say that that applies to your earlier point, Carmen, to firefighters with the boot, to anybody walking in traffic. It's not particular to somebody's economic situation. It's particular to the speed of the road, the safety, and the track record of the area. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I have another question here. Patrick, you may know the answer to this. Question goes, not knowing, do homeless people need a home address or a P.O. box in order to become employed? Also, in Wheat Ridge, are there places in the city where people are allowed to construct tents and have a tenting community or not? And lastly, there is talk of demolishment of the motels along the frontage road off Kipling and I-70. Has that been in float conversations? Thank you.
Bunch of questions. I think maybe Rebekah could speak to the if they need an address.
Yeah.
Most places, I would say 99% of places do require an address. There are a few nonprofits or partnering agencies like the Action Center and the Rising in Arvada that allow individuals to use that as an address. But again, just stating that not having an address isn't the only barrier to getting employment. They also have to kind of think about where they're going to store their belongings. Are they going to be able to shower before attending the interview? And there's a lot of other barriers just besides not having an address.
I think the second question, the mayor, that you read was, are there locations in the city that we allow organized camping?
Organized tenting,
Currently don't. I know people on the call have probably heard stories in the metro area. Denver's, I know, has done a few. I think Golden has a safe parking lot space. So that's something our city council can consider. We are really hoping to hear from our residents and our citizens if that's something they would support that their city doing. And there is a survey on going to be on the What's Up Wheat Ridge page that we're asking for your input. So, and the other question was about demolition, I believe, of some motels on I-70 Kipling. There's no active conversations about the city necessarily demoing any of those buildings, but if CDOT moves forward with the interchange improvements at I-70 and Kipling, two of the motels would have to be purchased by CDOT and demolished for that new interchange to be built. And that would be, and that these hotels know that, motels know that's the Interstate Inn and the Super 8 are both in the way of the new interchange, and those two motels would go away. There's currently no funding for that interchange, so no immediate plans for that to happen.
But that is on the CDOT 10-year list of priorities. So
if they get the funding, yes.
If they can get the funding. Allison, do we have what's the status on our Q&A, and how are we doing on time?
Well, we have lots more questions, but we do have some people. We have two members of our two attendees with their hands up right now, Mayor. So if it's okay with you, we'll go to Dawn and then Deanne.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, Dawn, you should be ready to go.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Longmont was able to run some safety studies on specific intersections to prevent panhandling at those locations, and were able to prove that those intersections were not safe and were able to post signs that individuals were not allowed to stand in the median. Is that a possibility for our city to do at the Four Corners intersection, which is of course the worst?
And that's part of, good question, Dawn. And that's part of what we'll consider when we're drafting the ordinance. And we do have ordinances already drafted at City Council that we took to City Council several months ago, and they asked to bring it back. And part of the rationale, yes, Dawn, is the safety factor. And the police department, I think, worked with the Public Works Department to find those statistics and numbers about safety. So those ordinances would be based on the safety issues.
Okay, so that is something in the works?
It is. So we're going to talk about it Monday night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have Deanne. 1 second. There we go, Deanne.
Hi. I wanted to thank Randy for centering all of this around the safety of everyone in this community. The safety of the homeless people, which we understand there's a lot of reasons why people are homeless, and we're empathetic with them. I worry about the panhandling on the median, the mother standing there with her child in the middle of a busy intersection. Not only that, but the carbon monoxide levels put off by those cars that are in a traffic jam are unacceptable levels. From a study out of Denver, they're at high levels. So that mother is subjecting that child to unacceptable levels of carbon monoxide, possibly putting that child's life in danger because of the traffic. The animals, same thing. I know it's their right. Everyone has a right to ask for help. I understand that, and I empathize with them. But does it really have to be in the center of a median? And I appreciate you, Patrick, you're going to address this on Monday. But also, another thing that you're talking about the greenbelt and the cleaning up and the safety of the greenbelt. I appreciate that as well. One main thing that I'd like to talk about is the drug pushers that are living in the motel, which I know their name. The homeless people know their name, and we know that they're coming from the American Motel. And is there any way to address them? Because the homeless people are falling prey to these people. And if you have an easy access to drugs, then you're not going to ask for help because drugs are easier to get. I myself saw a panhandler give this known drug dealer his panhandling money, and he gave him something in return. And that guy picked up his belongings and he left back to the motel. Is there anything done to address the drug pushers that are living out of the motels?
I'll let the chief speak to that, but one thing, as I mentioned earlier, Deanne, is it Deanne, right?
Deanne.
Deanne. We, as we mentioned earlier, we're working on a motel licensing system and program that would put more onus and restrictions, regulations on these motels to address some of these issues. And I won't go into a lot of details about that tonight, but we're hoping that is one way to deal with some of these issues, but I'll let the chief speak to specifically the drug issues.
Thanks, Deanne. Yeah, we're not tone deaf to the idea that there's some drug dealing going on at the American Hotel. I certainly wouldn't say it's all drug dealers or that it's even the majority, but we know that there are persons there who work in those illicit trades. Our West Metro Drug Task Force, that's a combined effort. They focus a fair amount of time on that building. I will say in the COVID period here for the last however many months, a year and some months, even when we catch those folks, they generally tend to get right out because of the jail restrictions. So it's been very difficult and challenging. Some of the new restrictions, and I don't want to make excuses, but some of the new restrictions under some of the bills that have been passed have made it more difficult for us to interdict these folks who are dealing drugs and use the sort of the established techniques of the past. So we're really trying to reinvent some of our actions on the street and how we deal with drug dealers, and we're so slowly working our way back to a place where drug dealing is being taken as a more serious crime, and jail is an opportunity to interrupt those activities. But we have had lately had better success with our American hotel, especially. We've actually been able to get them to hire their own security on site. We've seen a reduction in calls. I think it was 40 to 50% reduction in calls over there, and we've gotten a better relationship from them. So while it's not perfect, and while I understand that there is still drug transactions that may emanate out of that building, this is going to be a process to get there. And Brian, I don't know if you had anything else to add on your interactions with the American. No.
Thanks, Chief. We've had a really good relationship with the owner. One of the managers of the American call us when things look suspicious. As far as the drug trade and personnel, if you have any tips that we can forward on to the task force for West Metro Drug Task Force, we can send that along on your behalf. It can be anonymous, but just let us know how I can get that information over to them. People that are using drugs typically don't want to rat out their supplier. So that's a difficult thing to look at. The people may know it's there. People that are using may know who it is, but they're not willing to convey that to us. However, if Deanne, if you do know, please let us know, and then we can forward that information to Drug Task Force, and we can get some more intel on that. And if we can get a good lead and squash that drug trafficking, that'd be very helpful. So anything that I can do to help, please reach out and let me know.
Yeah. Deanne, if I just add one more comment, because Brian hit on something I kind of glossed over, but as you know, as we are unable to house low-level drug offenders in the jail, we no longer can work our way up the chain. Sort of, Brian says they won't turn over their supplier. That's correct. They used to, if the option was you go to jail or give us some information on somebody who's doing worse crimes than you are by using, but that option doesn't exist. So that's a good example of some of the obstacles that are new and created by the pandemic, and certainly some of the changes in our judicial system. So thank you, Deanne.
Thank you very much, Deanne, and thank you very much, Chief and Officer Gross for those answers. We have reached the end of our time limit for this forum. I want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and a huge thanks to our panelists and the ASL interpreters. I also want to say a particular thank you to Allison Scheck and her great team for all their hard work in putting this together. I hope you found this presentation informative. As I mentioned earlier, we have a great deal of information and ways for you to get involved with working on this problem. Go to www.whatsupwheatridge.com. Please find the homeless topic and take the survey and get it back to us by May 25th. Again, you can ask your questions of city staff on that page, and answers will be published publicly for all of us to be better informed. We will meet in study session next Monday night to talk about this topic, and there'll be more information then. Once again, thank you all, and have a good night.